The Avengers have had their highs, but they have also absolutely had their lows. Our greatest heroes have had some brutal defeats, and those lows have been extremely tough for us comic book nerds to read. And let's talk about some of them. Starting us off today, if we want to talk about brutal and we want to talk about comic books, then there is no better place to look than the 90s. Comic books in the 90s just happened to have this gritty, grunge, extreme thing going on, and the Last Avengers story was a pretty good example of this. With this really cool, chunky, gritty art style, it told a story set in the future with a new team of Avengers. Just kidding though, because they get completely wiped out within the first few pages. The current team of Avengers of this alternate future and their base are completely wiped out by an absolutely massive explosion caused by Ultron 59. Now Ultron basically then challenges Hank Pym and the OG Avengers to a final fight against himself, Kang, and the Grim Reaper. The thing is, there were not that many of the original Avengers left, with a lot of them being wiped out by villains or even by their own fellow Avengers. For example, Tigra was torn asunder by the Hulk, who had basically gone bananas, and then he and Wonder Man got into a massive fight that wiped them both off the face of the Earth. The Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver both lost their lives at the hands of the Vision, and the rest of the team just scattered. But while the 90s were characterized by the extreme, the early 2010s were characterized by zombies. It's just what happened. Probably because of The Walking Dead, to be perfectly honest. Marvel absolutely jumped on that with Marvel Universe versus the Avengers. Now this story, told from the perspective of Hawkeye, saw a plague turn people into intelligent zombies. The Avengers led any effort they could to try and contain the virus and save the populace. But when society collapses, it kinda seems to bring out the worst in people. The Avengers' efforts to save the world were consistently thwarted by infection, greed, and Doctor Doom, which I don't think anyone is too surprised about. It had a very grim ending, with most of the Avengers being wiped out entirely or going into hiding to survive any way they could, with Hawkeye's skull being smashed by an infected Thor. It's pretty rough. But moving on, during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, one of the greatest Avengers runs ever, these things called incursions started to happen, orchestrated by the Beyonders. Essentially, two universes would crash together, destroying them both, and the focal point for that crash was the Earth itself. When the incursions started to threaten the multiverse, Namor the Submariner basically found multiple different ways to go about wiping out any alternate Earths that appeared in order to save Earth 616 and save both universes. That's pretty brutal on its own, especially when he teamed up with Thanos and his Black Order, plus some powerful additions. But then on top of that, the Avengers essentially got split right down the middle. On one side, Iron Man and his group were trying to save their Earth, while Captain America's faction essentially wanted to stop the amount of destruction caused by Iron Man and his side. Meanwhile, you've got extremely powerful cosmic heroes being wiped out by the Beyonders left, right, and center, and it all came to a climax as pretty much all of reality got destroyed and a massive battle between colliding Earths and opposing Avengers took place. Now, it's never a good time when friends turn on friends. While there was a clear winner in terms of who won the conflict in Marvel Comics' Civil War event, that being Tony Stark, in the grand scheme of things, there really wasn't any winner at all. The Civil War split the entire superhuman community down the middle. Heroes allied with villains, friends turned on friends, people were manipulated into joining a side, and a few of those people even passed away, all for an act that would require the registration and regulation of superhuman individuals following a completely avoidable superhuman caused catastrophe. And while you had Tony Stark coming out on top, he made a lot of enemies along the way, including Spider-Man, and I don't think he ever intended for the death of Steve Rogers. Also, after he came out on top, he was put in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. and did a spectacularly bad job, leading to Norman Osborn, of all people, to take over, ushering in a whole lot of bad. I don't think anyone really came out from Civil War feeling particularly great. But the Avengers don't just exist in comic book form. Sure, the movies are never as vicious as the comics can be, but there is at least one occasion where things went pretty bad for our cinematic heroes. In the MCU, most of the movies follow a pretty simple idea of a hero facing and eventually defeating a villain, coming out triumphant by the end of the film, completing an arc. Even if the villain survives to continue into other films in the cinematic universe, they are still usually defeated by the hero at the end of their debut movie. Well, when we were given the Avengers Infinity War, it marked the first time in the MCU when the heroes, and furthermore, all the heroes together, officially lost by the end of the movie. Despite their best divided efforts to stop Thanos from acquiring all the Infinity Stones to complete his mission, he still managed to put them all into his big golden gauntlet and snap out half of the life in the universe. It left the heroes in shock of what even just happened as they watched their friends turn to dust, and when we meet them all in the next film, Avengers Endgame, they've all been left reeling and trying to just move on from such a massive defeat, which, sure, I guess led to one of their greatest victories, but whatever. Now, following the Civil War event, which we just talked about before, Tony Stark became the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he got one of the worst calamities to deal with in the form of Secret Invasion, where it was revealed that the shape-shifting aliens known as the Skrulls had basically infiltrated the Earth, with many of the world's heroes actually being Skrulls in disguise. At the end of that event, Norman Osborn was the one to actually save the day, and he made Tony Stark look so bad that Norman was actually given control of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers. But he made some big changes. Norman took the villains Daken, Venom, Moonstone, and Bullseye and repackaged them as Wolverine, Spider-Man, Ms. Marvel, and Hawkeye. Joining them up with heroes Ares, the Sentry, and Novar, Osborn himself donned Stark Tech armor to become the Iron Patriot, and this team became known as the Dark Avengers to fans. Villains taking over as the world's premier superhero team went just about as well as you'd expect it to. Now, normally it's the Avengers who are going on the offensive in order to defeat the villains, but in Avengers Under Siege, it was the Avengers who took the beating. Determined to destroy the team who he believed had taken out his father, Baron Zemo II created a new version of the Masters of Evil, and under his leadership, this team of villains took down the Avengers with a quickness. They blitzed the heroes, taking their base of operations from them, and they put a few of the Avengers in the hospital, with Hercules, Captain America, and even their butler Jarvis being really badly injured. Not to mention the damage that they did to civilians along the way. The Masters of Evil took way too much pleasure in their job, and they were very effective. The Avengers were left without a home, beaten and demoralized. Now obviously things changed and the villains were eventually defeated, but we the fans hadn't seen the Avengers this badly beaten up until this point. The Avengers Assemble. It's their thing, so naturally when they're disassembled, it's not a good time. And it's mainly thanks to the Scarlet Witch. Wanda and the Wasp were just kinda chilling by the pool when Wasp decided to mention Wanda's kids. The only problem is that the existence of her children had actually been wiped from her mind, and when Wasp brought it up, it brought all those memories back, and Wanda absolutely lost it. Several things happened next, with none of the Avengers even knowing the cause. For starters, Scott Lang, Ant-Man, lost his life when a previously deceased Jack of Hearts showed up and just detonated. While the heroes were trying to figure out what even just happened, Vision showed up saying that he was not in control of himself and that he is sorry, as he also began to detonate, and then Jennifer Walters, She-Hulk, began to get uncharacteristically raged and tore Vision in half. Next, we saw Tony Stark at the UN conference randomly start to act as though he was incredibly drunk, even though he hadn't had a single drink, and he verbally accosted the Latvian ambassador and threatened him, and then a whole invasion by the Kree just randomly came out of nowhere, resulting in the passing of Hawkeye, and then the Kree just randomly left as quickly as they showed up. All of that was actually Wanda Maximoff using her reality warping magic. It almost led to the superhero community deciding to put Wanda into the afterlife, and it led directly to the House of M story. Now, while some brutal Avengers moments take place on a universal scale, some are much more personal, and the court-martial of Yellow Jacket is exactly that. Hank Pym is a founding member of the Avengers, but his legacy took a very drastic turn, and surprisingly, it wasn't because he was the one who created Ultron. Hank had a bit of a mental breakdown, and he ended up going by the name of Yellow Jacket, and that's fine. Call yourself whatever you want. But if you strike your wife, then no one is going to respect you, and that's exactly what happened. When Hank hit Janet Van Dyne, it basically became the defining moment for his character, and there was no way he could come back. But then he made it even worse. Pym essentially orchestrated a robot attack on the Avengers, and he figured that if he destroyed the robot, he could earn back the Avengers' respect. After Janet Van Dyne defeated the robot herself, Pym was kicked out of the team, and his marriage ended pretty soon after that. But finally, in at number 1 today, with a title like Marvel Ruins, you can imagine it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and it really wasn't. This is a story taking place in an alternate comic book universe where literally everything that could go possibly wrong does go wrong. It's honestly best to just list off some of the events, then get specific here. The Fantastic Four's spacecraft crashed into the Earth, and Ben Grimm was left with survivor's guilt, because he was the only one who survived. The Incredible Hulk is not so incredible in this universe, and the gamma radiation that he experienced left him as a hulking mass of tumors and deformity, and it's horrifying. Thanks to the radioactive spider, Spider-Man did not gain the abilities of a spider, but he instead developed an incredibly brutal mutant virus that left him with a terrible skin rash and had him captured and quarantined by the government. The Scarlet Witch in this universe betrayed the Avengers to the government, leading to the Quinjet being blown up with all of them inside. Nick Fury was introduced to the idea of eating other people by Captain America of all people, and Johnny Blaze just sets himself on fire as a stunt and does not survive. Even Magneto goes off the deep end here, with his powers going out of control in an airport, destroying literally everything. The whole story just leaves you wondering what you're supposed to do with your life now. It's very, very, very bad. But that's all I got. Thank you guys so much for watching here on Top 10 Nerd. I'm Adam Andrews. I'll catch you on the flippy flop, but until then, stay safe and peace out, nerds.